Many of you saw Lee's video earlier this year about how, here at her channel, we're changing everything. Being photographers who showcase their work and process on YouTube with a side dish of Instagram, we frequently discussed gear. It's what brings many of you here, and it's what brings us ourselves to gear-focused channels. As you may have seen, going forward, Lee has decided to keep gear in the equation. It's hard to take pictures without it, but to make the gear more of the supporting cast rather than contributing to the endless string of YouTube gear reviews. Just a couple of short months ago, our Nikon Z9 arrived. Before you ask, I'll tell you that we purchased it on our own initiative through the Nikon website and paid full price just like most people have to. There's no secret deals or sponsorships from Nikon related to this video. As a lover of the bulkier legacy of Nikon Pro-sized cameras, I was the first of the two of us to volunteer to create a video about our experiences with the Nikon Z9. And around here, once you volunteer, it's your video to produce end to end. And Lee was quick to remind me that it would not and could not be a gear review in the traditional sense. Gear could not be the top focus. That's the rule for this video and the channel. I quickly asked if the subjects of photos could be the focus, and we might then discuss if and how the camera was able to help us capture these subjects. And as an expensive camera, would we have needed to spend on this camera to get the results? Lee, maybe a little begrudgingly, agreed that the angle of how the gear supported us would be quite relevant, but that I would be on a short leash if things got super technical. The good news is that there are plenty of very high quality sources of technical information on the Nikon Z9, which we will link in the description of this video. So, with quality subjects as the focus, I would need to hatch a plan. I would need to get this beast of a camera outside to the real world and take pictures. Normally I'm the trusty sidekick, however, since I volunteered for this one, Lee would play the role of trusty sidekick while I got on with business. And I should have seen this coming. Lee kept the Z9 super busy and I'm super lazy. As a side note, we are not married to this camera. We did sell much of our Sony gear to KEH.com to fund about 80% of the Z9 purchase, but if it's not the right camera for us, we're not afraid to fail fast. And usually we know very quickly whether or not we bond with a camera or don't. So if this camera does not help us do what we love, we're not going to pull any punches in this video or others. We decided that we would select several common and popular photography scenarios and put the Z9 to the test. And we intentionally selected some areas that do not play into the speed and accuracy of the Z9. The Z9 certainly could be characterized as a sports, action, and wildlife camera. However, we see any camera as more than that. The reason is this. While you might consider the Z9 for those high strength areas, It may also be the camera that you use personally or professionally in any number of situations, from portraits to landscapes, still life, street photography, astrophotography, and literally anything else that requires taking a picture. The Z9 might be your only camera, so you're going to want to use it for many purposes. Right now, we're going to do something a little bit different. Lee and I both are going to share our conclusions on the camera, and then we're going to get into the details of these various photo shoots that we did.
The Z9 is an improvement on the previous Z system bodies in nearly every way. When it was announced, it seemed to me like it was the mirrorless camera body that many Nikon users have been waiting for, both current Z system users and folks that have been waiting to go mirrorless for one reason or another. Looking through the specs, I really hoped that the camera would live up to Nikon's promises, and after using it for the last couple months, I can say that they did. Speed, battery life, smarts like eye detect autofocus and autofocus tracking, but it is a big camera body, which I personally don't like, but I understand that a lot of you out there do value that. It's expensive. Plus, while this camera is very, very good, it won't automatically make you a better photographer or automatically get you amazing photos. It'll help, but it's not magic. I'll talk more about that later. Raymond, what do you think?
I think that you hit a very good point. That's what I think. It's not going to take someone who's a non-photographer or an entry-level photographer and make them magnificent best photographer in the world. But for someone who's already tuned their craft and continues to refine their craft, it's going to give them a lot of tangibles and intangibles that make their job easier and make the quality of their output better.
Well said. Obviously, if you're a beginner and this camera really speaks to you and you have the budget for it, by all means, go for it. The key here, and the point that we're trying to make, is to set your expectations. Skills first, and then the technology will support those skills. Raymond, we've been talking to people in the comments and in email on these videos for over a decade. People all over the world that use different brands, they share what they like and they don't like about cameras. Who do you think the Z9 was made for?
I think the answer to that is clear to most people. It's designed to leverage its strengths with sports and wildlife photographers. But photography is obviously not limited to that. And even people who do sports and wildlife photography might have other cameras or use the camera in a different way than that. But not everybody wants a bag full of cameras. So what we found is that the Z9, in its own right, it's a force of nature, it's a large camera, but it's like having a bag full of different cameras that are for dedicated purposes, but it seemed to do all those purposes very well. So let's get started today in our deeper dive review, now that we've talked about our conclusions, with the action photos that we took and the journey through that.
It's time for a collaboration. I've got the Z9 and the 70-200 f2.8, plus a couple of smaller lenses in my pack. Raymond is somewhere up ahead of me with his mountain bike. And it's going to be interesting because Raymond's going to try and go over some jumps that are down this trail. Has Raymond ever done a jump on his mountain bike? That's a good question. Let's ask him. Hey Raymond, tell us, have you ever done jumps on your mountain bike before?
So no, and I've been warming up here where there's like 3 jumps and I'm too scared to take them. But when the camera's rolling, it could be a whole different story.
Okay, so the key to action is the speed and responsiveness of the camera, the frames per second, and its ability to track people and other objects very quickly. So as it turns out, when the camera was rolling, there wasn't any more hang time on me and my bike than before the camera was rolling. These are like steep jumps. I don't ride it like a BMX bike. I go out on long rides. So, the pictures were great and it tracked exactly what it needed to track. I was visible throughout the segment that we rided, and the camera did the job. Maybe I wasn't up to the task.
So for shots where Raymond's face was in the shot, The eye detect did extremely well, even from far away, and could keep up with him. He wasn't exactly a super fast moving subject, as he mentioned, but when I wanted him to go across the frame and he was going to come through with the side of his face, and the camera I knew wasn't going to pick up his eye very quickly, or quickly enough at least, I pre-focused on him where I wanted the shots to be taken, and then set the camera to manual focus so the focus wouldn't move, and then he came through with his bike.
It didn't even enter my mind that the camera could have gotten eye autofocus with the distance we were apart and then me moving at a moderate pace on my mountain bike. So with those findings, it was time to break out our secret weapon. We always have a backup plan, and it's this little RC car that can go literally 60 miles an hour. So when there's jumps and there's an RC car, there's a lot of fun. Now there's just one problem, and it's not a problem with the camera. Maybe it was a problem with our setup, maybe not, depending on how you look at it. The truck is much smaller than me on my mountain bike, so as it was coming up to this jump, we wanted it flying over the jump with a trail of dirt behind it. And well, based on where we were situated, as the truck disappears behind the hill, the camera doesn't know that we're driving it up over the hill. Sometimes the truck itself, when it's going as fast as it can, will go in different directions over on the hill. So I couldn't even give Lee a reliable idea of where the truck was going to show up.
I did try to do the pre-focusing trick that we did when Raymond was on his bike, where I pre-focus, switch it over to manual, and then we go from there. But as Raymond said, the truck was unpredictable in where it would come over the hill, so that just didn't work. So I moved myself. That was it. The shot that I envisioned just wasn't going to be possible with at least the time allotted. So I moved myself and I just took some different pictures. I had to exercise my creativity.
And we did have a lot of fun putting the truck into different situations, doing burnouts, kicking up, plumes of dirt, and just had a good old time taking pictures of it.
It is my turn with the Nikon Z7 this morning, and I am out on a kind of a typical morning that I would take my camera out on. I have a whole bunch of lenses, including a super telephoto lens and the 70-200, but right now I have the Z9 set up behind me in that structure with an ultra-wide lens. I am at Wapatki National Monument, where there are all of these structures that have stood for over 800 years. They belong to the ancient Puebloans, and it's really neat here because at this national monument, for I think all of this, well, maybe not all the structures, many of the structures, you're able to actually go into them, which is unique and special. And I've always wanted to set up my camera in one of the structures for a time lapse, and that's what I'm finally doing today. I do, like I said, have some other lenses with me, including super telephoto. So I am going to continue on this morning after I'm done here, after the sun finally rises. And this loop connects to Sunset Crater National Monument. So it's just a great long, I think it's about a 30-mile drive loop where I might see wildlife, I might see who knows what. So we'll see what comes my way this morning.
Right out of the gate, I said in the beginning of this video that this camera isn't magic. Here's the thing. This time lapse, while pretty cool, didn't meet my expectations. I imagined a more dramatic sunrise with the shadow dropping away to reveal this time-worn structure, but it fell a little flat. Let's watch it again. There were no clouds to break up the sky, which I figured was going to be the case, but we didn't even really get any cool colors in the sky. I miscalculated where the tripod and camera shadow was going to end up. My result is just okay, and a different camera would not have changed that. And incidentally, the wildlife were hiding this day. So while I captured this wonderful drone footage of me driving on the road, I did not capture wildlife. So I went out the next morning and captured this sunrise through the trees time lapse. It's beautiful, and I expected nothing less. I've been to this place before. I knew how to best set the interval timer to achieve the results I wanted. And the raw image files had plenty of flexibility when I edited everything together at my computer. No surprises there. However, I didn't spend a lot of time doing landscapes with this camera because of course it would be good for landscapes and nature photography. Every camera on the market right now would be good for that.
For portraits and product photography with the Z9, we're using this Viltrox 50mm f1.8 lens for Z cameras. Viltrox heard we were going to be talking about the Z9 in a video, and they sent this along for us to try with the Z9. We're doing the portraits in a minute, but with the product photos that I've done so far with this lens, it's performed exactly as I would expect a Nikon brand prime lens to perform on the Z9. Focus has been great, the rendering has been great. I like that it opens up to f1.8, and who doesn't like a nifty 50? So we're gonna do the portraits, and I'm expecting similar results as we did with the product photography.
For portraits and product, just like landscapes, virtually any camera on the market will perform very well. Now, there's some advantages with the Z9 that we found. One, it's very quick on the draw. I mean, as we said earlier, this camera is geared towards sports and wildlife photographers. So if you have a portrait subject, it's going to get focus on them very quickly. Also, you've got the vertical grip, which a lot of portrait lovers like. Take the vertical shot, have the controls right here on the side of the camera.
It is definitely a big asset that there are independent lens manufacturers making Z lenses now, because they're a lot less expensive. And that was and continues to be a major sticking point for a lot of people, is that the cameras are very expensive, yes, but the lenses in the Z system that are created by Nikon are also quite pricey. And while they're great lenses, they're not in everyone's budget. So it's cool that there are these third-party lenses that just don't quite cost as much.
And it proved its worth and value on our Z7 as well, because we have one Z9, so we couldn't take the portrait for the thumbnail for this video with the Z9. We wanted the Z9 in the thumbnail, so we moved that Viltrox 50 over to the Z7, took those pictures with the Z7 with Lee holding the Z9.
I'm on wildlife duty this morning. I'm at a riparian area in the Phoenix area, and I've got the 200 to 500 millimeter with the, it's an F-mount lens, so I've got the FTZ2 adapter on here, and it is just after sunrise, but we have a lot of clouds. There's been raining on and off, which thank goodness for good weatherproofing on these items. But while I have been getting good photos, and while I've been incredibly impressed with iDetect, even when the birds are far away, I'm blown away that it's actually picking up their eyes, which makes my job a lot easier, especially when you are at 500 millimeters and you end up with a shallow depth of field, and I'm really getting focused on that eyeball instead of its back or something, which I've had issues with in the past when I am manually choosing my focus area. Not manually focusing, but actually choosing my focus area rather than allowing the camera to look for the eye. Sorry, something moved over there. I am waiting for this brown and white speckled, big, kind of heron-looking bird to move. I don't know what it is, but I've been waiting patiently for him to move. So, you know, while this camera will focus on the eyeball and it's super fast and I can shoot really cool video, you know, slow-mo video with it, it can't get the bird to move to a good spot. So I have to be patient and ready with my finger on the shutter release for this bird that I want to photograph to get out from behind all of these sticks that it's behind. So anyway, let's see how I do.
This is the bird I was talking about through the branches. I just couldn't get a good angle on him or her. It was also still quite dark, so this was captured at ISO 25,600 in case you're interested in seeing what high ISO looks like. I didn't do any noise reduction on this photo. So I walked around, stopping in a few spots where you could get to the bank of the pond, capturing a few photos, even though I knew they weren't stupendous. This was the very best angle I could possibly get, and these are still not prize winners. So again, I don't mean to repeat myself, but this camera is not going to get the prize-winning shot for you. I got out there before sunrise. I carried the heavy gear. I sat there on the cold ground in the rain waiting. I walked around looking for the right spot. I sat on the cold, damp ground again, and I still couldn't get the shot I wanted. But let me share where it did help me get the shot. Animal eye detect works very well, even from a distance, like when the bird's eye was just a tiny part of the frame. This is the type of situation where with other cameras, I have experienced the water tricking the camera and the eye detection focus area will jump off into the water, but we see this bird in focus the entire time. I saw that over and over again on this morning. The eye detection is very effective. Autofocus tracking does a good job in video as well. In this video, I had the camera on a tripod, but set the focus to track the bird just in case it moved around. And I was quite impressed that the camera didn't get fooled by the busy background and the focus didn't jump off the bird when this duck swam by. I would be remiss not to touch on speed again. I know we mentioned it already. The speed and responsiveness is an asset when you're photographing fast-moving wildlife like birds in flight. But like we've said a bunch of times already, you still need the skills to back it up. You need to be quick with your camera to utilize the quick camera. Wildlife is also where the high pixel count of the Z9 sensor, it has 45.7 megapixels, is an asset, because even using a lens that reaches to 500 millimeters like in these photos, I still wasn't as close as I'd like. So I could make those pixels work for me by cropping my images. I even used the 70 to 200 millimeter for some of my photos on a different day out with the camera, and I was thankful for cropping when the friendliest Roadrunner I've ever seen hung around and modeled for me. Okay, enough about me. Raymond, you did a little bit of wildlife photography while I was busy flying my drone. How did that go?
I did. I'm not as persistent as you. I didn't go out as many times as you because of those reasons that I talked about earlier, being lazy. I went to one of my favorite scenic locations for spotting birds where there's water, trees, other, gifts of nature, but the birds don't like me nearly as much as they like Lee. So they were much smaller in the frame. And I did get some shots of them, but one thing that I learned about the Z9 is when the bird is the same size or smaller than the focus area, an individual focus area of the camera, you'll get a shot or two, but it's not willing to track it until the size of the bird relative to that focus spot exceeds, the size of the bird is larger than the focus spot. So my results were inconsistent because of the distance to the birds. I didn't get eye autofocus from that distance. You couldn't resolve the eye from that distance. And like I said, the birds weren't having anything to do with coming over to me and magically circling around my head or anything like that. So at a certain point, I had to call it. It was getting dark. You did have the drone, so I actually got some shots of that because we had more control over where it would be. But it certainly wasn't ideal for me. And your shots not only were a lot better, but they proved the strength of the camera a lot better as well.
Let's bring this home. Going from all of the prior Z bodies to this Z9 reminds me of when we purchased the D300S right before we started this channel. It was such a huge jump in terms of capability from anything else I'd used, and that's what this is like, at least among Nikon cameras. And for those of you that do like using Nikon, this camera won't disappoint. It has that balance of capability, practicality, and ease of use that I associate with Nikon cameras. Everything that you already love about Nikon is here. It's just improved. There are a few new usability features that I haven't even used yet, but I know will come in handy, like the screen tilts up in the portrait orientation, and this camera has a special mode where you can brighten the screen significantly beyond the normal limits in very dark situations when you're using very long exposures. If you do astrophotography, you know that's a game changer. But it is a large body and it is pricey. The size will prevent me from using it as often as I would if it was smaller, like my Z7. Even Raymond, who actually likes the larger body, I think will hesitate to take it out on an everyday outing. Am I right?
You are right, and it really depends on circumstance. This is not a camera that you can put in your pocket, toss into a lot of bags. You're not going to need a bigger boat with this camera, but you might need a bigger bag, depending on what size camera your bag is suited for.
Yeah, Sony's Alpha 1 is a similarly capable camera, but it has a much smaller form factor, so we know it can be done. That being said, I also know many viewers wrote to me saying that they wouldn't consider purchasing a mirrorless body because they're too small. So Nikon had to make a decision on who to please. Those of us that want the compact body and those of us that want the larger body. Maybe there will be a future Nikon Z body with a similar relationship to, say, the D5 and the D500, the majority of the capability of the flagship in a smaller form factor. We'll see. Either way, the bottom line is that this is a fantastically capable camera body, but gear will never fully overcome a lack of skill. What do you all think out there? Is this the Z body that made you diehard Nikon DSLR users go mirrorless? Or no? Tell me, why or why not? I'm always interested to hear your thoughts or read them. Like Raymond said at the beginning of this video, we did purchase this camera. We will be using it. In fact, this is our primary action and wildlife camera. Though I am really looking forward to the summer and doing some astrophotography work with it. The Milky Way will be around soon. Subscribe if you're interested in seeing that stuff. And thank you for watching.